Hello guys, what is up? And today I'll be showing you how to add costumes into Cosmo X. Now I'll be configuring the Cosmos sprite to show you how to add costumes. So over here in the Costumes tab, as we'll open it up, notice here that there are 5 costumes. These costumes you don't want to mess with, and they should just be left alone. Now if you notice here, there's a folder here. You can click it open or click it closed. This folder here will show you all the sprites that you need to duplicate. Move down and then adjust. I'll show you what I mean. So if you right click with the mouse, right click, duplicate. Then click on this next frame here. Notice how when I check them, they're different frames. So if I zoom in and then click here, it's a duplicate. So this is how you make sure that you're not accidentally moving an original costume down. So now you're going to right click here and then do move to bottom. And then now you can just right click here. And it's already has, as you see here with the red highlight, it's already selected this costume. So just duplicate, move down, and then move to bottom. And then just duplicate again, go down, move to bottom. You will have to do this for all the sprites within the costume. There's no exceptions. And if you notice here, this means that you cannot make high FPS versions of costumes. You're going to be limited with what's given here. For example, this sprite here is Cosmo, just staying stationary. And if you notice, it's 8 frames to the left. So that means if you wanted to, you could make another loop animation with 8 frames. Here is the exact same animation, but mirrored. So the one thing that I'm going to tell you is all you need to duplicate is quite literally only one direction they're facing. But to make things easier, instead of having to readjust flipping it, as I've shown in the previous video, by using a circle and then adjusting it from there, instead you can just duplicate all of them. This will be a lot easier to just duplicate all of them instead of duplicate one side and then duplicate it again to then mirror it using that technique. So to save time, just duplicate it and move it down. And there's the final step. Once you duplicate it and move it down, you will then need to make sure that it is then here with these sprites. So here I had some leftovers. Oops. I'm going to get rid of those. And here we have ourselves that these 4 are still a part of this costume here. But these are basically unused. But because they're unused does not mean that you should remove them. They have to be there, or else the costumes that are placed below here will break, and the shield hurt boxes won't break. So we got to make sure that if we're going to make a new costume, that it's exactly in order and that we have all the frames, no missing frames. So here you have 3 frames of Cosmo stationary. So if I want to try this out, I can just, adjust the color, maybe make this just that color. And there we go. Now we can give this a very dirty test run. So how do we do that? In order to test run it, you will have to add it into the list. I kind of lied there, but there's no way to really test run it. You're just going to have to run the game and add the costume here. So to add the costume, you will have to go to Unlocked Features, open it up, and if you notice here, there's Costumes, where it says Costume. It's in English. Costume. You can copy this one, and let's say for example, or copy this one, and let's say for example I want to add Cosmo but modified, so let's just name it Dosmo. Yeah, so Dosmo, and then you don't even have to have this part here, but you preferably want to have this here, this $sign with the costume word and the colon, so that way you understand that it is a costume. it's going to be a little difficult to know what certain things are if you don't put hat here in the front of Hero Chow hat. And there's also hat here again. So we just have, so this tag here is optional, but I would include it just for good practice. So now that we have a costume called Costume Cosmo, what we're going to do now is we're going to close out of it and make sure that it is saved in the list by just clicking over here. Yep, looks like it's added. And then now we are going to go into list of Cosmo costumes. Note that we are modifying it for Cosmo. If we were modifying it for Tails, we would go to list of Tails costumes. Or if it was for Sonic, we would go to list of Sonic costumes. So now go into the list of Cosmo costumes and append it to the end, add it at the end. This order is important. And the reason this order is important is because 1, ID, and 2, the order that this ID is relevant in the ordering of these costumes here. For example, if you notice, this is normal Cosmo. So the costume ID here is going to be 0. Now notice that this is Cosmo Doll, and Cosmo Doll is over here as ID 1. And if we scroll down, we will notice that we now have Cosmo Christmas, which is the second. So order is important. If you want to make your costume be the very first one, you would then instead have to move it here and make this costume move down. Don't worry. All you have to do is to just, for example, just move it up, right click, move to top, and then now just move it after this folder. And if you notice, now these are all moved down one. All the costumes below it are going to be moved down by 1. So now I'm just going to move it back, and this was the first frame, so I am testing my memory here. So that was the first frame. Yes. Alrighty. So now let's go over here to costume, and then we're going to do costume Cosmo. So this list is going to show you the list of Cosmo costumes, and this list for the unlocked features is going to show you which costumes are unlocked from all characters. So we have costume Cosmo and then costume Cosmo here. That means that this costume is now unlocked and you can now access it. But there's a few more things that we have to change. So I'm going to then go here into the sprite, and we are going to go into what is known as character select model. So here there are a lot of costumes that you will need to include. If you notice here, there's quite a big list. For example, Cosmo 1, stand. And then here, the naming doesn't really matter, because if we go here into the game, I will show you in a second. So when we start this game, what's going to happen is, give me 1 second. I'm going to mute the game. So what's going to happen is, from this list of characters, right, or character names, sorry. So character names is going to grab the name of the character. So Cosmo 1, this name here coincides with this name. So Cosmo 1 shares the ID of 1. Tails 2 shares the ID of Tails of ID 2. As you see here, 3, 4, 5. And then we have a bunch of other fillers that you can just, modify if you want. But here with character names, if we have the default Cosmo costume showing up right here, instead of making things complicated, when we go to costumes of the character select model, when we go into the sprite here, notice how it's just the same name, but we added stand at the end. And by doing stand, well, it's going to show Cosmo. If we change the name to sta, it's going to cause problems. See, now it's no longer updating because it doesn't know what you're talking about. See, it doesn't change here. Well, it's not going to update it, so now let's put it back. So now we have Cosmo 1 stand, and this is good. This is what we want. Now, when you click confirm, notice here that it's just going to go to the next one, next, and then next. So if I could pause the game, but if you notice here, it's just 2 frames afterwards. And this is important to note because if I flip this frame around and I do Cosmo next, you'll notice that instead she ends here. So the ordering of the 2 sprites afterwards is important. And yes, you will only have 2 frames to animate the pose. I understand it's not a lot, but it's just how it is programmed. So now if I fix it back to normal, there we go. It's back to order. And the ordering of this does not matter, of the Cosmo 1 Fallen, but in order to make sure that these characters, that their name displays on the death screen, we have Cosmo 1 Fallen, but this does not relate to costumes, so don't worry about this one. I'm going to tell you which ones you have to worry about with the costumes. This one you do not have to worry about. These 3 you do have to worry about their order, but know that these can be anywhere as long as you're not messing up the order of a standing animation, as it's called, and that these are in order like this. So 2, 3, 4, as you see the number here. And this one also, this one does apply to costumes because Cosmo is dead here with their normal costume. So the costume name for this one is just Cosmo 1 Dead. If I wanted to see the dead sprite for Tails, it's simply just Tails parentheses 2 end parentheses dead. So you have to make sure that this word's at the end, and you got to make sure for Tails that when he does his little pose for being selected, that you have stand for the first frame, and then the 2 frames afterwards are then this, are just in order. So now we have ourselves Knuckles. If you notice, the naming convention stays the same, just his name is quite long. And also we have here his dead sprite. And the same goes for Sonic, Amy, and Cream. Note here that Cream gets 5 frames, and that's because these frames are made slower on purpose, just by using the method of duplication. So Cream gets 5 frames, everyone else gets 3. Even Galaxina only gets 3. Even Big does. And you notice here they all have that same word. If you don't have an English keyboard, just highlight over that word and then copy it and then just paste it as you need it to be. And the same with this dead word here. These frames you don't have to worry about. Neither this one or this one. This one, nope. Not this one. Definitely not this one. So how do we get costumes then? Well, it's very simple. If we go over back here and I show the list again, and I go to list of Cosmo costumes, if I go there now, you'll notice here that costume, Cosmo doll, and then capital stand as at the end. So this is Cosmo's first costume, which is Cosmo doll. So if I were to copy this here and then paste it here, and then let's see what happens. So if I just don't put stand at all, let's see what happens. Just saying, it's not going to be pretty. So now let's change your costume. And if you notice here, the sprite is not rendering properly. And actually, I think there's another bug going on. But if you notice here, it's because of this one being weird that now we have this strange issue going on. So now if I just put stand in front of it, hopefully that issue is gone. Oh, yeah, looks like I have something to fix. So apart from that, the way to just add the standing costume is to just do, just to copy this here, and then put stand at the end, all capital like that, and done. And then just remember the rule is that these two have to follow it in the order that you want, and then just make sure that for the dead one, it's the same thing, just you put dead at the end. So I glazed a little over it, you just paste it and then put dead. Let me make sure I typed that right. Okay, I did. And now there's that sprite there. Notice how they're different sizes. Not everything was made to be an account for the artists. So there's going to be a little bit of a struggle with just making sure that your character does not overwhelm the screen or is way too small. Same here with the pattern for Cosmo Christmas. And of course the dead sprite. It doesn't matter where these dead sprites go. It can be anywhere. As long as it's just not here. Because then Cosmo will just be selected to die. So we have Tails doll. And notice here that it's going to have stand at the end, and it doesn't matter what this is named afterwards. These don't matter. The names to these two sprites after the main one that appears here does not matter. You could even name it something like Dumbo or something. It wouldn't really matter. And yeah, so that's how you add costumes. I hope you found this tutorial helpful, and if you have any questions, let me know. And as always, have a good time making costumes. And one more note to say is that when you put the list of costumes for each character, assume that these are all not case sensitive. So if you're going to make a costume, please don't do I would prefer that this is not a thing. I'm not sure if this is won't break anything, but just for good practice, I would stay away from just making differences with the casing like that, and instead maybe just add a extra R at the end, or underscore. That's all for this video, and thanks for watching.